Council here in Lincolnshire County Council. And just to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed by the Council's website. There is no fire test alarm today, so if there is one that goes off, can everybody please exit the chamber through the rear doors up there of the chamber and make their way to the car park in front of the council offices. Members should be mindful that the high-performing loop system is sensitive to any type of noise in the chamber. Ambient sound from the chamber immediately prior to the meeting and during open sessions may be picked up by the loop, and therefore councillors should conduct private conversations outside of the chamber. The loop will be muted at the close of the meeting. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live. Please speak directly to the microphone and press the button again to switch it off when you have finished speaking. And you will get nudged by others when you forget to do that. Okay, item number 1 on the agenda then, apologies for absence. Rachel.
Thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillor Cheen, the Executive Councillor for Highways and Transport.
Although I believe he's following us online today. Item number 2 then, declaration of councillors' interests. Do we have any executive councillors with any interests that have not previously been mentioned? No?
Not sure.
Thank you. Then item number 3, announcements by the leader, executive councillor and executive directors. I don't have anything. Nobody has spoken to me about anything. No, all shaking their heads. Good stuff. On to item number 4 then, the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 2nd of September 2025. This is a confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record. Hopefully everybody would have a look through those minutes. Any comments or any inaccuracies that anybody found that needs to be corrected? We don't need to show hands. Okay, good. Everybody's happy. Don't need to show hands. Okay, to the first substantive point of the meeting then, item number 5, the Links Coast 2100 Plus programme. Over to Andy Gutherson, right in front of me.
Thank you, Leader. The report in front of you is setting out our strategic approach, acting in partnership with East Lindsey, the Environment Agency and the Internal Drainage Boards, the Lindsey Marsh Drainage Board, in respect of working through a programme to enable us to bid for national funding to secure investment in the East Coast flood defences. So I'll just ask Chris to pick up on some of the detail and the key points for members to consider this morning.
Thank you, Andy. Yes. So key details in the report as read. However, just to go through some of the major points within that, as you'll have heard from the from the Environment Scrutiny Committee report and the meeting of the 1st of August, the Environment Agency presented their current position regarding the coastal sea defences in the East Coast. That having done some investigations to those defences, by 2040 they won't be providing the level of protection that we require them to do so, and that's degrading all the time. Currently that beach nourishment programme where we pump, or the Environment Agency pumping sand up onto the beach to protect those concrete defences from waves and the sea and the salt, is keeping them going for now, but by 2040 we will really need to have got our house in order in terms of how we proceed going forward. As part of that, the Environment Agency need to put together a business case to government for the level of funding required to be able to do so. And as part of that, we have a partnership between ourselves, the Environment Agency, East Lindsey District Council and Lindsey Marsh Drainage Board as the internal drainage board for the area, under the banner of Links 2100 Plus. And the Environment Agency are doing a piece of work within that. They're putting in about 3.1 million to develop their side of the coastal investment plan. The request of the remaining partners is to fund looking at the vision going forward, because what government will expect from a treasury position is a place-based business case which demonstrates the rationale for investment to protect infrastructure along the East Coast and the wider Greater Lincolnshire geography. So that's the challenge we're faced with now between the three other partners of East Lindsey and the Internal Drainage Board. And the report is basically outlining the process that we will need to go through what's known as the NISTA process, the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, to give it its full title. And you'll see in the appendix at the back the list of work that's required and the values that we've put in terms of completing those processes. That then to be shared ideally amongst the partnership, which I believe we'll hear more from later. Obviously, there's a challenge in terms of the time frame. This needs to be completed by March 2027, so time is of the essence in terms of getting going and getting on with this, hence the speed that we've brought this to executive following the Environment Scrutiny Committee. And other than any further questions on that, Leader, then that covers the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Andy, for the report as well. I now open up to any questions from the executive. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. Just Appendix 1, where the map is, Chris, there isn't a key, so I just wondered if you could just advise what the different shades are and what the gradients mean. Thank you.
Yeah, so actually what the shading's showing, almost like the topography elements. So you have that coastal zone with the marshes running from the coastline inwards, and then you've got the national landscape and the wider national character areas, and then there's the fens as well. So as part of this, it was to outline where exactly the defences are. We're looking at it's that point from Gibraltar Point at the southern end of the lighter green all the way up through to the Humber mouth when it starts being picked up by the Humber 2100 project. Further south we have the Fens 2100 project, which are in a slightly different position, and at some point we will be taking a piece back to scrutiny about the wider context of Greater Lincolnshire for all of the flood risk zones there we've got.
Right, okay, thank you. And the other one is looking at the table which outlines the costs for each section. It was just how we'd come up to those costing amounts. There isn't too much specific detail in terms of how we're actually getting to that point.
So in the speed that we put this together, it was taking professional judgment from officers who are well versed in this side of works, and then benchmarked against consultancy rates that we're aware of for that type of work as well. So it is a benchmark figure. Admittedly, it's not set in stone, but it's the most professional one we could gather, without going into too much detail at the first instance.
Thank you for that. And I'd just like to point out that obviously we are very much in support of this. It's just a couple of clarification questions for me. There is nothing more important than this. It's a huge project that needs to be looked at in terms of urgency. So obviously something that I very much support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Leader. It's not actually a question, it's just that when I was sat at it's more of a statement. When I was sat at the scrutiny meeting, a lot of comments were made about this is due to climate change. Well, I'd just like to point out this has nothing to do with climate change. The Lincolnshire coast is a man-made environment, and it relies on the sea defences. So if we don't replace and repair our sea defences, then the sea will take back what was originally it is. It's nothing to do with climate change. That's just the lay of the land.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Anybody else? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking towards the recommendations, which I believe we're moving towards now, recommendation 1 is for Lincolnshire County Council to bear the remaining cost of the business plan, which amounts to just under £1 million. Did you get the opportunity to speak to the leader of East Lindsey District Council to see if there's a possibility of sharing that cost, as I believe they want to be a valued partner in this endeavour?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Gibson. I have spoken to Councillor Craig Leyland, the leader of East Lindsey District Council, and we have collaborated on this, and East Lindsey will be a full partner going forward and have agreed to share 50% of the costs. That is collaboration, working together for the betterment of the residents and our constituents of not only East Lindsey but for the whole of the county. And it's refreshing and it's good to see that approach taken. So yes, East Lindsey are a full partner. We will get them heavily involved, and they will be fronting half the cost of this. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anybody else? Okay. In that case, I invite the executives to vote on the recommendations set out on page 17 of the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Gibson, and a seconder, Councillor McGonigal. Yeah. All those in favour, just raise your hands. That is unanimous. Don't have to do the... Right, that's unanimous and carried. Thank you very much. Like I said, like Natalie said, it is probably the most important thing this council is going to have to work on. It's a stark recognition when you stand on the coastline on some of the sea defences and you look back at the land. It is terrifying to think of us not getting this sorted. So, like I say, it's the most important thing that any of us will be sitting in this room trying to deal with. So, thank you very much. On to the next substantive item then. Item 6 on the agenda is the adoption of the updated local enforcement plan. Back to Andy Gutherson. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. As a planning authority, we have a role of making sure that we enforce the planning legislation in the context of making sure planning permissions are properly implemented, conditions are applied to, and monitoring takes place. As a planning authority, we're obliged to make sure that we're delivering those services in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework. That's been updated over recent years, and it was felt appropriate that as a result of that, our planning enforcement plan should be updated to reflect that guidance and to make sure that we're complying with that national position. So I'll ask Neil just to sort of highlight sort of any of the key points that have changed, but it's an important tool in our ability to operate effectively as a planning authority.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, Leader. Good morning, councillors. Yeah, I'll just give some background to the report and pick out one or two bits from the report. So, as Andy said, that about 12 years ago, the National Planning Policy Framework was introduced, and as part of that, it set out an encouragement of local planning authorities to produce a local enforcement plan, which basically sets out how that planning authority would undertake enforcement action within their area. In the County Council's case, you may be aware that the majority of activities that we're involved in from a planning perspective relate to minerals and waste, and those are the areas which obviously take most of our time in terms of undertaking monitoring and enforcement. In addition, what's relatively unique to the County Council rather than the district councils is that legislation was introduced that enables charging to be undertaken for undertaking site visits to minerals and a landfill site. And the local enforcement plan basically sets out the framework as to when we would undertake those monitoring visits and how many visits we would undertake in any particular year. So the actual charge out rate is set nationally. It's just under £500 a site visit. But as an authority, we can decide to inspect one particular site for up to 8 times in a particular year. So again, the enforcement plan just sets out the sort of procedures or the things that we take into account that set out how many visits we would do to a particular site. So it gives the industry some sort of explanation as to why their site has either 1 or 8 visits in a year, and it also sets out for the communities as well to understand when and how we would take enforcement action if we need to do so. So we did do a light touch update of the plan in 2020, but given further changes to the National Planning Policy Framework that have come out recently, and also, as you'll recall, at the last executive, we introduced the biodiversity net gain plan, so there's some implications from that we need to capture in our local enforcement plan. And finally, with the number of nationally significant infrastructure projects that are coming forward in the county as well, we felt it was the right time to introduce some wording around how we would look to enforce and monitor against those projects going forward. So hopefully that gives you a background as to the plan. We've also, what we've done this time, which we haven't done previously, we've also produced a sort of supplementary guide, which is a more condensed version, so that's hopefully more helpful to members of the community and the industry to see. It sets out the highlights in the plan rather than going into all the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Andy, for the reports. Any questions from any of the executive? Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Neil, for the plan. First one from me, page 48, where it mentions the Minerals and Waste Local Plan. That's due for adoption next year. So it was, will we have to revisit this plan once that plan has been adopted next year?
No, so we, the current Minerals and Waste Local Plan was produced in 2016, and there was no need to update the previous version of this to sort of take into account that. So there won't be anything that comes out of that process that will require this to be updated.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is regarding NSIPs. I couldn't see in the plan that it was specifically mentioned when it came to levels of monitoring, and also whether or not NSIPs are subject to the same mandatory BNG as the other developments. It didn't specifically mention it, so I just wanted to check that that was the case, or whether or not that's included elsewhere in one of our other plans.
So currently, NSIPs aren't required to incorporate BNG. The intention is that that will come into force in April or May 2026. The original intention was that it was going to be introduced next month, but the government has sort of rolled back a little bit and sort of set the timeline to April 26 now. So that's when it will become mandatory for NSIPs to actually basically deliver BNG. At the moment, a lot of the developers are sort of accepting that that will be a requirement, so they are embracing that, although there are one or two developers who remind us at the moment that it's not mandatory, so they don't need to do it, but that's the sort of timeline for when it will become mandatory from next April. In terms of the monitoring of the NSIPs, I think at this stage we will need to do some more work on that to sort of set out how we will do that, because clearly there are a lot of projects coming forward. The enforcement procedures are slightly different, that if there's a breach of a requirement on an NSIP project, then that immediately is a criminal offence, whereas if you breach normal planning rules, it only becomes a criminal offence once you've served an enforcement notice. So there is a slight difference, but we will need to do some more work in relation to how we will monitor the NSIPs, and I think at a future date we'll probably bring forward some sort of supplementary guidance around that and look to attach that to the plan at the appropriate stage.
Okay, thank you for that. I think potentially there's some lobbying there with the government, one with the biodiversity, and then also in terms of the monitoring for these NSIPs. We're seeing such a substantial amount now in Lincolnshire. It seems like it'll be quite the task to be going out and performing this monitoring. So in that sense, from a funding perspective and from a resource perspective, I think there's something that we need to probably do as a council in order to ensure we are going to be able to contain that.
Yeah, so there is an opportunity and we are starting to do that on one of the projects that we're waiting for a decision on. So we are looking at, through a Section 106 agreement, to get contributions from the developer to pay for that monitoring. I think we will look to roll that out wider as things move forward. And on the solar projects that have gone forward, we have secured money for fire and rescue to undertake monitoring in the first year and each subsequent year of the life of those projects, to make sure that the battery energy storage systems are built in accordance with plans that have been approved, so that hopefully reduces the risk. It doesn't remove it, but at least if they're being monitored, then you would hope that would reduce the chances of any sort of fire event taking place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions from any councillors? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Leader. And Neil, thank you for the report. I mean, it's just an observation initially, followed by a question, but I find it strange that that NSIPs are currently exempt from BNG when all others aren't. And judging by the amount of NSIPs that are planned for Lincolnshire, we could be replanting a new Sherwood forest potentially in the future. However, my question is, if NSIPs are currently exempt, when the first spade in the ground goes in, will NSIPs will BNG be applied retrospectively to NSIPs as they go on throughout the years?
Legally, no, because it only comes into play once an application has been submitted. So any applications that are submitted after April, May next year will automatically be required they will face the same obligations as Town and Country Plan Act applications do at the moment, where they will have to deliver. It will be a mandatory requirement. At the moment, some developers are being more sort of helpful than others, particularly for solar farms, because it's relatively easy for them to deliver BNG on their sites, even though they're not mandatory required because of the type of development. Some of the linear projects, like the offshore wind and then the cable routes that come onshore, that becomes more challenging, and they're less, let's say, less supportive of doing BNG, and where they don't have to. So some are doing it voluntary, others saying, well, we don't have to do it, so we're not going to do it. But the answer to your question is that if they haven't, it's only those applications that come in after next April, well, then they will automatically be mandatory required to deliver BNG.
Anyone else got any questions? Councillor Catton.
Thank you, Leader. Just on that point, if there's a variation to an application, would that then be covered by the biodiversity net gains provision?
I think that in terms of the sort of variations that you can do under a DCO, a development consent order, they're relatively sort of restrictive, because otherwise you'd end up having to do the whole process again. So I would say my gut feeling is that it wouldn't be caught by BNG, even if that change comes in after the mandatory requirement, unless it could be demonstrated that that change was then causing something that potentially might, if it was just sort of changing the location of the fence or something like that, I think it would be then difficult to then say that was going to be caught by BNG. But if it was something more fundamental, then there might be an option to do it at that stage. But I think my gut feeling is that it wouldn't be caught, but that's something that could potentially be explored.
Thank you. I was just thinking about maybe a change in location.
Yeah, so if it was a change in location, I think we'd be talking about a whole new application, and then they'd have to start the whole thing again. The variations that they can do are relatively minor in terms of, just potentially, maybe moving a bank of solar panels slightly to one side or whatever. They couldn't go outside the red line boundary without basically making a new application.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Is there nothing we can do as a council in terms of policy to put something in place until we have to wait for this guidance to come through?
I mean, I think what we're doing through, at the moment, there's 4 examinations that are currently ongoing, and we've had other examinations earlier on in the year. And we have been making the argument during those examinations that these developers should, although it's not mandatory at the moment, that they should follow the BNG requirements. And that's been met with varying sort of levels of success. Some of the examining authorities have said they've put requirements on for the developer to actually achieve levels of BNG because, although it's not mandatory, they've said that's the direction of travel, so they ought to be doing that. And obviously the developers that the solar farm ones have been relatively comfortable because it doesn't sort of cause them too much of an issue, so they've been okay to do it, whereas some of the linear schemes have been less delighted about the prospect of doing it. So we are, through the examinations, encouraging the examining authorities to say, look, this is coming down the line, these developers should be doing it now, and that's what we're encouraging them to do.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor McGonigal.
Thank you, Neil. And you've mentioned about securing funding for the fire service to do monitoring for some of these sites, which is fantastic. But at the moment, the Fire and Rescue Service isn't a statutory consultee throughout these processes. I know that the National Fire Chiefs Council are currently lobbying to try and get some more weighty powers for consultations of this nature. Is there something that we can do as a county council to try and support that?
There's two sorts of, two different types of development. So when I refer to Town and Country Planning Act applications, then the fire service aren't a statutory consultee. But when it comes to NSIPs, because the county council is a statutory consultee and fire and rescue are part of the county council, then they do have that same sort of authority. So that's probably why it's been easier for the NSIPs to get the sort of funding that we've managed to secure for monitoring, because they are seen as a statutory consultee. It becomes more difficult for Town and Country Plan Act applications because they aren't then a statutory consultee, but that sort of falls to the remit of the district councils rather than ourselves. So that's not something that this local enforcement plan is really sort of tackling, because that falls down to the district. So we, where we can, in NSIPs, we do manage to secure that monitoring funding, because we are a statutory consultee, well, the fire authority are a statutory consultee as part of that process.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Clegg.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Neil, for this very informative report. But if I could just take you to page 113, reference the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, excuse me, and the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy. It says here that there are not considered to be any direct implications arising out of the contents of this report. May I say I disagree? I think there are. And I just would suggest you consult, if you haven't already, our public health team. Thank you.
I mean, we are in regular contact with public health in terms of planning applications and how we go about. So, we do work quite closely with the public health team in terms of getting comments back on planning applications. And one of the things that we're looking at doing in terms of the new Minerals and Waste Local Plan is making it a statutory requirement for a health impact report to be submitted with a minerals application. So we do work quite closely with public health in terms of making sure that that's an issue that gets addressed through the planning process.
If I could just come back, but does that mean that there are no direct implications arising from the contents of this report? Is it? Do you stand by that?
That's our assessment. As that we feel that is the position. It's not that we don't, in terms of dealing with plan applications, we do obviously engage with public health and get comments back, and we take those into consideration. But we don't necessarily see if there's anything that's directly related to the enforcement plan as part of that process.
Okay, I'm not entirely convinced. I'd appreciate if you could have a word with reference to this report with our public health team, though, please.
There's a nod. So it looks like
Thank
that's
you.
all done. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. No question. Looking at the paper, comprehensive. Thank you very much. Happy to move the recommendations on page 35, recommendations 1, 2 and 3.
Yes, thank you. I'll just point out to the Executive that the Environment Scrutiny Committee gave some comments in the report, and for information they're on page 39 and 40. We've got a proposer. Do we have a second? Councillor Brooks. All those in favour then? Again, that is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, final item on the agenda then, item number 7, appointment to outside bodies. Over to Nigel West.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this report invites the Executive to make 2 amendments to the appointments to outside bodies within its remit. The first is in relation to the Boston Town deal, and it's recommended that Councillor Barry Daish is replaced by Councillor Sam French as our representative excuse me, on that outside body. It's also recommended that the Council is represented on the East Midlands Council Strategic Migration Board by Councillor Alex McGonigal to replace Councillor Paul Locke. In addition, Leader, there's been a new outside body requiring a County Council representative, and it's recommended that Councillor Danny Brooks sits on the Skegness Neighbourhood Board. They're the recommendations in the report, Leader. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nigel. Do we have any questions regarding that? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a bit of housekeeping, really, to make sure we've got the right people in the right place. The Skegness, a bit disappointed. The Skegness board, actually, we had to fight a little bit to make sure we got that position. We've got positions on the other Boston, Spalding, etc. Positions for the Forgotten Town money, which I believe was its first name, forgotten by the Conservative Party, I'm sure. But nice to see that we've now got Mr. Skegness representing Skegness again. Happy to move the recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Brooks.
Just a question for Nigel. Do I have to declare an interest on this item as I'm being put on the board?
No, Chair, no, Leader, there's no need to declare an interest. It's a County Council body.
And as regards to the East Midland Council Strategic Migration Board, Alex McGonigal's been attending that anyway, so that was just a bit of a paper exercise to get that in the right position. Any other comments? We have a proposer. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Oliver. All those in favour? That is unanimous. And that is just a minute past half an hour. So that's fantastic. Well done, everybody. Thank you for today. Thank you for coming, and see you all at the next one.